Imagine you're still a child, your feet barely touching the floor when you sit.
You don't fully understand the world yet, only that it's supposed to feel safe.
But instead of playing or learning or dreaming, you're being led down an aisle. You're 12 and you're being married, not to someone you love or even someone you know, but to a man chosen for reasons you don't understand. A man much older.
A man with expectations.
Months later, your small body carries a child. You're 13, pregnant, and scared, but no one asks if you're ready. Because in this world, your feelings don't matter. Your voice doesn't count. You're not seen as a child. You are seen as a womb. A tool for power, politics, and legacy. This is not just one girl's story. This
Is the beginning of a life shaped by pain, by duty.
by the cruel silence forced on girls who were never allowed to grow up before being broken. She was born into a world of titles and tapestries where her family name carried weight, but not safety. From the moment she opened her eyes, her life was already mapped out by men who saw her not as a daughter to protect, but as a name to be traded. Her bloodline was royal, tangled deep in the roots of England's throne, and that made her dangerous. Not in the way of swords or armies, but in the way of inheritance. Her body, even as a baby, was a piece of strategy, something to be claimed, managed, and passed along. She wasn't born into comfort. She was born into expectation.
And long before she could spell her own name, it had already been signed onto marriage contracts, used to settle debts and seal alliances. She belonged.
To a family of power, but she had none of it herself. She entered the world with a noble name, but that didn't mean she was safe. Her blood connected her to kings, to power, to thrones that men would kill for. And that made her something valuable, though not for who she was, but for what her body could give. Even as a child, people looked at her and saw a future queen maker, a girl whose womb might one day produce a king. She was watched, weighed, discussed in dark corners and royal courts, but no one asked her what she wanted. She was not treated like a person with thoughts or feelings. She was treated like a bridge between bloodlines, a tool to carry someone else's legacy. And while others saw a noble birthright, all she knew was that her life was not her own. She never met her father. He died before she was even born. And so, from the first breath she took, she was already caught in a storm of power and politics. She didn't arrive into a warm home, held close by a family that could protect her. She arrived into a battlefield quiet, hidden, and made of whispers, not weapons. Without a father to shield her, decisions about her life came quickly, and none were hers to make. She was raised in fine houses, surrounded by lords and ladies, but never treated like a child meant to be loved. She was prepared, positioned, and pushed forward like a piece on a chessboard. Every lesson she was taught, every move she made, had one goal: to make her useful to those who held real power. Love was not part of the plan. Her future was not hers to dream about. It was already being written for her, and it was full of duty, silence, and sacrifice. She was only 12 when they told her she was to be a wife. Her hands were still learning to write, her thoughts still full of stories and dreams, but none of that mattered. The man they gave her to was Edmund Tudor older, powerful, and hungry. For more, he didn't see her as a partner. He saw her as a step closer to the throne. Her blood made her useful, and in his world, usefulness was everything. This wasn't marriage built on love. It was built on strategy, on alliances, on power plays made in royal halls. She had no say in it, no voice that mattered. She was expected to leave childhood behind overnight, to understand duty, to carry the weight of a family's ambition on her tiny shoulders. And though she wore a wedding dress, it felt more like a uniform one she couldn't take off. She was 13 when her body began to change in ways she couldn't control or fully understand. Her belly grew heavy and unfamiliar, while her small frame ached under the weight of a life she never asked for. She was still a child herself, barely. Grown, still learning who she was. But now she was expected to become a mother. There was no comfort, no gentle hands, no soft words to guide her. Only fear, only silence. She carried the baby in a house full of adults who saw her not as someone hurting, but as someone fulfilling her duty. The pain was constant, not just in her body, but deep in her heart. She was alone, no friends, no real family beside her. Just cold walls, distant faces, and the pressure to survive. Their fear never left her, not during the sleepless nights, not during the long, aching days, not when she wondered if she would even live through the birth. Because deep down, she knew girls like her weren't protected, they were used and forgotten. Before she could even learn what it meant to be a wife, she became a widow. Edmund was gone dead from illness or war. The details didn't matter. What mattered was that she was barely 14 with a newborn in her arms, and no one left to stand beside her. In the eyes of the world, she was now a woman. But inside, she was still a frightened girl, broken by childbirth, shaken by loss, and drowning in a life that kept taking more than it gave. There was no comfort in widowhood, only danger. A young girl with a royal bloodline and a baby son was a target, something to control, something to use. She had no power, no money, and no voice in the decisions made around her. Men still ruled her fate, and now, without a husband to claim her, she was more vulnerable than ever. Everything about her life was uncertain except one thing. She had to protect her son, no matter what it cost her. He was tiny, fragile, and quiet, with a face that barely filled her hand. His name was Henry, Henry Tudor, and from the moment she held him, everything changed. She was no longer just a girl trying to survive. She became a mother with something to fight for. Every bruise life had given her, every fear she had swallowed, now hardened into something stronger. Resolve. She had lost so much so quickly. But this child gave her something back: purpose. The world saw him as a distant thread in the tangled web of royal claims, a boy who might one day matter. But to her, he was already everything. She knew the danger. Others would try to take him, control him, use him. So she stayed quiet but watched everything. She learned how power moved, how people whispered, how plans were made behind closed doors. Her son wasn't just her heart. He was her answer, her reason to endure. And though he was still in the cradle, she saw what others didn't. One day, he could be a king. Once again, she was told to marry. There was no choice in it. A new husband, a new household, another life she didn't ask for. But this time, something had changed. She didn't fight it, she observed. She didn't speak loudly, she listened. Everyone thought she was harmless, just another quiet, noble woman tucked away in the background. But in that silence, she was learning. She watched how men spoke to each other, how alliances were formed, how secrets passed hands over wine and titles. She understood that real power didn't always wear a crown, it moved quietly behind the scenes. So she adapted. She used what little she was given and turned it into something more. She built trust with the right people, played her role with care, and kept her ambitions hidden behind polite smiles. She couldn't claim power in public. But in private, she was slowly, patiently building a network. And every move she made had one goal: to protect her son and to prepare for the day he would return, not as a boy, but as a ruler. The kingdom was tearing itself apart. The Wars of the Roses had turned England into a battlefield where loyalty changed overnight and no one was truly safe. Kings rose and fell like the shifting of seasons. Families turned on each other. And through it all, she stayed quiet, watching the chaos unfold from behind guarded doors. Her son, Henry, was far away, sent into exile across the sea. Just a boy trying to stay alive in a world that didn't want him. Most mothers would have broken under the weight of fear. But she didn't. She couldn't. Every day she walked.
A thin line pretending loyalty to the ruling house while secretly working against it.
She sent messages in code, made secret alliances, and waited for her moment. Everyone else saw a noble woman with no real power. But behind the silence, she was moving pieces like a master at chess. Her son might have been far, but in her heart, she never let go of him. He was her hope, her mission, her quiet rebellion. And she would risk everything, her safety, her name, even her life, if it meant putting him back where he belonged. She had no army, no sword,
no title strong enough to command men in battle.
But she had something just as powerful: patience, and a mind that never stopped working. While others marched and bled, she wrote letters wrapped in layers of meaning, sent through trusted hands, promises made in whispers,
oaths exchanged in candlelit rooms.
She reached out to powerful nobles, listened to their fears, and offered them a future one where her son would sit on the throne, and they would stand beside him. She never signed her name to anything dangerous,
never spoke openly of rebellion.
Outwardly, she remained loyal, careful not to draw suspicion. But beneath that calm surface, her cause lived and breathed. Every message sent, every ally gained, brought her one step closer. She didn't need to swing a sword to change history. She just needed to survive, to stay unnoticed long enough to pull the right strings. Because while others played the game, for glory she played for something greater, her son's crown. The throne changed hands again and again, but she stayed where she was steady, composed and never fully trusted by anyone, and that was exactly how she wanted it. When one king fell, she mourned politely. When the next rose, she offered her respect. But behind every bow, behind every carefully chosen word, her loyalty never shifted. It belonged to one person, only her son. She walked a dangerous line, keeping peace with those in power while secretly working to bring them down. One wrong step, one careless word, and she could lose everything. But she never did. She learned how to speak just enough, to listen more, to appear harmless even when her mind was plotting 3 moves ahead. Every alliance was temporary, every friendship strategic. She had to wear many masks, but her purpose never changed. In a world where women were supposed to be quiet and obedient, she mastered the art of survival and used it to play a game most thought she had no business playing. The throne changed hands again and again, but she stayed where she was steady, composed and never fully trusted by anyone, and that was exactly how she wanted it. When one king fell, she mourned politely. When the next rose, she offered her respect. But behind every bow, behind every carefully chosen word, her loyalty never shifted. It belonged to one person, only her son. She walked a dangerous line, keeping peace with those in power while secretly working to bring them down. One wrong step, one careless word, and she could lose everything. But she never did. She learned how to speak just enough, to listen more, to appear harmless even when her mind was plotting 3 moves ahead. Every alliance was temporary, every friendship strategic. She had to wear many masks, but her purpose never changed. In a world where women were supposed to be quiet and obedient, she mastered the art of survival and used it to play a game most thought she had no business playing. Everything had led to this. Years of silence, of letters slipped through shadows, of alliances formed in secret and loyalties measured by risk. Now her son was no longer a boy hiding across the sea. He was a man ready to return. The Battle of Bosworth would be his chance to claim the crown, or to lose everything, and she knew the cost. If he failed, they would both be branded traitors. She would lose her lands, her freedom, maybe even her life. But she didn't hesitate. She poured every favor, every ounce of influence, every name in her quiet network into this final move. Nobles who once doubted now stood behind her son. Soldiers gathered under his banner. And she waited, breath held, for the sound of swords and fate. She had played her part in silence for so long. But this was the moment she had dreamed of, fought for, suffered through. It was more than a gamble, it was everything. Her son's crown, her victory, her legacy. And then it happened. Against all odds, her son won. The Battle of Bosworth ended with the fall of a king and the rise of another. Henry was crowned not just as a survivor, but as England's new ruler. And she, the quiet woman who had spent her life in the shadows, was no longer just his mother. She was now the mother of a king, the mother of a new dynasty. No longer forced to hide her power, she stepped into the light with the same calm strength that had carried her through the darkest years. But even now, she didn't seek glory. She stayed behind the scenes, guiding, advising, protecting. Her influence was stronger than ever, not because she shouted, but because she had always understood the true nature of power. She had built it quietly, patiently, piece by piece. And now, with her son on the throne and the future finally in her hands, she proved that even in a brutal world, a woman's strength could shape history. She could have claimed more. She had every right to. After all, she had endured marriage at 12, childbirth at 13, widowhood, war, and political games. She had helped win a crown. But when power finally stood before her, she didn't demand the title of queen. She didn't need it. Instead, she carved out her own space, one that had never existed for a woman before. She insisted on being treated as the king's equal in court, in decisions, in presence. She signed her letters, Margaret R. The R standing for Regina Queen, not a queen in name, but in authority. She attended council meetings. She advised her son. She oversaw finances, lands, and law. Nothing important happened without her hand in it, but she still moved with that same careful grace. She didn't rule from a throne, she ruled from the room next to it. And in doing so, she redefined what power could look like. It didn't need a crown, or an army, or a man's approval. It only needed a woman who refused to be forgotten. In a world where women were meant to be silent, she found her voice in silence. Where they were expected to follow, she led from behind. No other woman in English history had done what she did. She wasn't handed power. She wasn't born into a role that allowed it. She created it carefully, quietly, and without apology. From a frightened girl forced into motherhood to the mother of a king. Her journey wasn't marked by battles or crowns, but by patience, wisdom, and uncheckable will. She proved that strength doesn't always roar in front of crowds. Sometimes it whispers through corridors, hides behind veils, and waits for the right moment to rise. And when it does, it changes everything. Her name may not be shouted in every story of kings and wars, but without her, there would be no Tudor dynasty. She carved her legacy in stone, not with a sword, but with something far sharper, determination. She was, in every way, a woman above all women. Long after the battles were over and the crowns had settled, her influence lived on. She wasn't just the mother of a king, she became the architect of a dynasty. Every law passed, every alliance made, every child born into power traced back to her choices, her sacrifices, her quiet strength. Her grandson would become one of the most famous kings in history, Henry VIII, and his daughter, Elizabeth I, would rise to be one of the greatest monarchs the world has ever known. But none of it would have happened without the woman who endured it all, the girl married too young, the mother who never gave up, the strategist who shaped history from behind the curtain. Margaret Beaufort didn't just survive her world, she rewrote it. Her legacy wasn't just royal blood. It was proof that greatness doesn't always begin with power. Sometimes it begins with a girl who was never supposed to matter, and ends with a dynasty that changed the world. Take a moment to think about what it truly cost her. The childhood she never had, the fear she carried at 13, the silence she learned to master. Power didn't come to her. It came through loss, through pain, through years of waiting and watching while others ruled. She was used, pushed aside, forgotten by many. But she never forgot who she was or what she was fighting for. Every step she took was for her son. Every risk, every whisper, every alliance made not for glory, but for survival, for her bloodline, for a future she might never see but still believed in. She paid the price that history often demands from women like her, and in doing so, she became something no one expected, a woman who shaped the course of an empire without ever needing to wear a crown. Asterisk. She was married at 12, pregnant at 13, a widow before she was even grown, and yet she outlived them all. The men who controlled her, the kings who overlooked her, the world that tried to keep her small, not just in years, but in memory, in legacy, in the story of a dynasty she built from shadows. Her name still echoes, not because she was loud, but because she endured, because she refused to be forgotten. And in the end, history remembered her not as a victim, but as the mother of a kingdom. She left no army, no throne of her own, but what she built outlasted battles and kings. The Tudor name would rise, rule, and reshape England, all because a girl who had nothing chose not to break. In silence, she created legacy. In grief, she carved power. And though time has worn away the voices of many women like her, history still whispers her name. She might have been only a mother in the eyes of men, but to history, she was the beginning of a dynasty. Or, if you want something even more poetic, she ruled no kingdom, yet shaped the fate of one.